Okay. Sorry, there's just a few last minutes coming in. So just give it another minute or two and let them get connected. And then if you're ready, David, we'll make a start.
Yeah, ready when you are.
Okay. I think we're getting somewhere. So yeah, good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for attending. This is the first of a series of winter online talks that we're going to be hosting, which I'm sure you've seen on our social media and website and various places like that. So if you keep an eye on that, because we will be adding a few more in the coming days as well. So that's going to carry on right up until probably spring of next year, the way it's panning out. So got a good host of talks. Sorry, just muting everyone. What we'll do as well is we'll obviously gonna let David run through his presentation, and then if we save any questions for the end, if that's all right, just to just to keep the flow of things, and I'm sure David will be happy to answer your questions at the end. And one little plea before we make a start. We have a planning application in at the moment for a new hide at Mare Lake in Bude. If you could go onto the planning portal, Cornwall Council's planning portal, and kind of put just a little note of why you think it would be a good idea, that would really help the application. And it's been quite a lot of hard work just to get it to this stage. So we would be really appreciative if you could just take like 5-10 minutes to do that. That'd be great. And we'll put a little link out on the news page of the website at some point this evening. And yeah, great idea, Keith. I'll once the talk starts, I'll find the link and I'll post it in the chat. Okay, so I'm going to pass over to David now, and thank you, David. So David Collins is a member of the board. He's our ecology officer and also pretty tip-top birder and lizard in the Halford area is local patch. So we're going to hear all about that this evening. So without further ado, I'll leave you to it, David. Thank you.
Thanks, Pete. Yeah, so I've been birding on the lizard now for about 25 years, but initially that was because we had timeshare on the lizard, but then almost 8 years ago now we moved to the area. So I've become one of the small band of dedicated birders who birds most of the time on the lizard and the Halford, because it's a bit difficult to decide actually where the lizard begins and where it ends. And as you'll see in a moment, where my house is actually just on the north side of the Halford. So the area I bird is the lizard and the Halford, really, which means to say I don't have to go around the other side of the Halford to see something if it's on the Halford River. So I'm going to start this talk in a very bizarre place, and the reason for that will become clear when I talk to you about it. So the reason that this talk ever got put together in the first place was courtesy of the Bangor Bird Club, believe it or not. So about 2 years ago now, I put together a talk about Fuerteventura, which is an island I know a lot about, having lived out there for a while and studied the birds there. And so I sent round an invitation to lots of bird clubs in Britain, and ended up giving quite a few talks. But the Bangor Bird Club, somehow, for some reason, it worked out that I lived down here and was near the lizard. And they said, well, yeah, we'd be quite interested in talk about Fuerteventura, but we'd actually be much more interested in talk about what you do birding down on the lizard. So I said, fair enough, that's what we'll do. So I put this talk together then, and I've modified it slightly for the audience, because obviously people from Bangor, I wasn't even sure they'd know where the lizard was, so it's starting in a slightly different place. But yeah, so anyway, as a slight plug, and then I'll get on with the talk. If you've been to Fuerteventura bird watching, or if you're interested in going there at some time in the future and you want to know more about the birds, this is the book for you. So there's a chapter on Hubara buster, there's a chapter on Canary Island stonechat, and so on and so forth. It's available on Amazon and or from me if you want a copy. I can send you one direct for about £10 or something like that. Anyway, on with the talk. So you'll pretty much all hopefully be familiar with where the lizard is. But as I was saying, it's not always that easy to work out what you mean by the lizard. And I think all of the 10 or a dozen or so birders who bird the lizard regularly have a slightly different interpretation of what it is. So some people take it only as the bit south of the River Helford, which is, I suppose, sensible, except that where do you draw the line where the Helford runs out? Most people include Loo Pool, which is one of the good places to go bird watching on the lizard. And some people include all the way, well, we all include, I think, Helston Boating Lake for the very simple reason that it's a good place to go bird watching. And again, I've got some photographs of the sorts of things that turn up there in a moment. Some people include Port Evans, some people don't. But for me, I include basically everything that's on that map because my house is there and it would seem daft not to include where you live. So my lizard and the Halford is pretty much all that you can see on that map. Just very quickly, some of the really good places to go bird watching. I've already mentioned the boating lake at Helston, Loo Pool, good for things like goosander in winter. And then further on down the coast, really anywhere from about Predannock, perhaps down to Lizard Point itself, and then up to Blackhead is the area where the most of the rarities occur in that sort of triangle of land, if you like. And then, of course, there's places like Goonhilly Down, which are great for things like harriers and such forth. In terms of existing information about birding on the lizard, there's obviously Brian Cave's book, which is very largely about the southern end, as his subtitle says. It's mainly about the area that he can walk to from lizards. So this is records going back about 25, 30 years, I think. Well, back to 1970, as it says here. So indeed, 54 years, would you believe? And it's full of sightings and records. So that's one source of information about the lizard. And the other one that's really useful is Ilya's website, Lizard Birds, which has a complete list of all the species that have been found on the lizard, which amazingly comes up to 378 species, of which I've currently seen about 265, I think. And he puts on things there like a yearly roundup of all the rarities that have been found and things like finders reports for particularly rare things. So if you're interested in reading a bit more about the lizard birds, those are the two references really. Most of you, I think, will recognize Lizard Point itself, which is one place where you can go sea watching. So we normally sea watch right by that, the National Trust centre there, because it's sheltered in a southwesterly, which is when most of the good birds are seen. And of course, it's close to the cafe, which is always great for bird watching. And lots of invasive plants. So this is all South African species of succulent, which are invasive, and they're trying to get rid of them. But yeah, I'm sure you're familiar with that, most of you anyway. To start with, I'm going to just go through some of the basic habitats and one or two of the birds that are associated with those, and then I'll go through the seasons, starting in winter and working through spring, summer, and autumn, and the sorts of rare birds that we find. So starting, this is Kynan's Cove. Again, most of you will probably recognise it. And I think this is probably the rock that the brown booby was on at some point in 2019, which I was lucky enough to find. But I just thought I'd start with some of the cliff birds, because there are some nice birds to be seen on the cliffs. Ravens are fairly common. I mean, they're common all over the place, but they do nest quite a lot on the cliffs there. And for any of you that are interested in photographs of birds, there are some extremely tame ones at Kynan's car park, and these are two of the birds that you can see there. If you go there first thing in the morning, it's a really good place to get photographs of ravens. Peregrines, obviously there are peregrines right around the coast of Lizard. Seem to be doing reasonably well, I think. I know there's concern about some populations, but I think the lizard population's okay from what I've seen. And of course, management of the coastal grassland is critical for the one bird that Cornwall is particularly famous for. By grazing the grassland, you make it nice and short, which means that it's ideal for choughs. And it also means that you get a profusion of some of the rarer plants that the lizard is famous for. And I won't go into the details of what these species are. That's yet another talk on the plants of the lizard. There are hundreds and hundreds of different species, some of which are quite rare. But yeah, the grazing maintains the flora as well as the birds. So obviously we're very famous for our choughs, and you all know the story, I'm sure, of the birds that arrived from Ireland and just started to nest here. And I'm afraid I've got far too many pictures of choughs because, as you can imagine, if you spend all your life birding around the lizard, you bump into them a lot, and it always seems a bit rude to just go walk past them without taking photographs. So yeah, I'll just start with a few pictures of choughs. And as this picture amply demonstrates, they need this really short turf in order to get invertebrates. That's what they specialize in, and they hack out the turf to get at the invertebrates underneath. So originally, all of the choughs, I think, that were born in Cornwall were ringed, colour ringed like this. And then it got to the point where there were so many of them that actually it became impractical to continue to do so. So you now see quite a lot of choughs that don't have colour rings on them. So yeah, just a few pictures about our dear choughs. I've lost count a number of times I've bumped into visiting bird watchers that said, "Have you seen any choughs?" If I'd got a pound for every time I'd been asked, I'd be rich by now. But they are very easy to see all around the peninsula. Spectacular in flight. I think it's one of the most amazing birds to see in flight, and you can tell them immediately from the very similar size jackdaw by the way that they fly. They're much more acrobatic. Yeah, lovely birds, and we're so lucky to have a thriving population of them. It's a really good news story. So other habitats is obviously all the coastal heathland and the heathland that goes right across into Goonhilly. We're blessed with a great deal of heathland habitats. So that's things like Dartford warblers, nightjars, and so on and so forth. And in the winter, the harriers and so forth. So it's a fantastic piece of habitat. Those of you who know the area will recognize Jollytown, those two cottages there, which is one of the great places to go bird watching in the autumn, as I'll tell you more about later on. But not forgetting the Helford River with its fantastic ancient oak woodlands, some of the best surviving ancient oak woodlands in the country around the Helford, with attendant bird species such as green woodpecker. Green woodpeckers are still reasonably common in the woodlands there. But there are species that have declined almost to the point of extinction, even in these wonderful woodlands. So spotted flycatcher is one example. Best place to see these nowadays is Croft Pascoe Plantation, which of course isn't ancient woodland, it's pines. But I'm sure they used to be fairly common around the Helford, but not anymore. You rarely come upon them. Another thing that seems to be declining almost to the point of extinction now is marsh tit. They've since I've been down here in 8 years, they seem to have declined quite significantly. So hopefully we won't lose them, but you just never know. Tree creepers seem to have gone completely. Again, in my time, certainly 20 years ago, you could see them in places like Trellewarren, and in certain places along the Helford. But these days, you don't see tree creepers in this area at all. On the plus side, firecrests, which used to be very much a winter visitor and something that you looked out for in October as they came back into the country, suddenly over the last literally 3 or 4 years, they've started nesting everywhere. So lots of places on the lizard have now got breeding firecrest. There are breeding firecrests in Constantine Village, Treba Gardens, all sorts of places have got breeding firecrests. Which is not to say that they're easy to see in the summer. They're not. They're still easiest to see, I think, on autumn migration and in winter. because in the summer they become really secretive birds, but beautiful. And it's great that we've got this additional species to see in the summer here. This one was in my garden. They're regularly in my garden, and they roost in our big holly tree every winter. So I get great views of them from the windows. Loopool, as I said earlier, things like goosander wintering here. It's quite a good place, although it's quite a walk to go all the way around it. As anybody who's tried will know, it's not easy birding, I don't think, but some good birds have turned up here in recent winters, things like long-tailed duck and indeed surf scoter a couple of years back. So yeah, good birds do turn up here. There are two sizable reed beds at Cornwall and Poldhu on the west coast. This is Poldhu, which is the site of a big starling murmuration, and there's obviously quite a lot of people go down there to see the murmuration during the winter. Both reed beds have good breeding populations of Chetty's warblers. And sometimes in the early spring, when they're setting up their territories, they can be quite easy to photograph, as this one in the car park at Cornwall demonstrates. Handsome birds in their own way, even though they're just brown and white, with that characteristic, very explosive song. So that's a little bit about the habitats. Now I'm just going to run through the sort of birds that we see and look out for in the winter months, sort of this time of the year. This is obviously a field for feeding on apples in my garden, and certainly if you put out apples late winter or when it's really cold, you can usually entice them into the garden. But they're not in the gardens at the moment, I don't think, because they're still busy eating all the berries in the hedges. But lovely birds to see. On the Halford itself, there are quite a few great northern divers. It's certainly the commonest of the divers around the coast here. You regularly see them going past the point, and all of the coves seem to have at least one or two great northern divers in winter. And sometimes you can get decent views of them, and sometimes they're miles out and you can't get decent views of them to check them all over. And a word of warning with this photograph here, the beak shape on great northern diver can sometimes make you think you've got white-billed, because they do sometimes turn up quite a lot. So don't be fooled into thinking you've got a white-billed if it's got a turned-up beak. When you do find a white-billed diver, you really will know, because it's got a ridiculous banana beak and it's a different color. But yeah, just that warning. So a red-throated diver, we see a few going past the point now and again, but what we've come to realize is that in March, particularly in March, February, March, possibly into April, we get quite big numbers actually wintering in Mounts Bay, and you can see them from places like Cornwall down below the Houseeffron Inn. If you set your telescope up there on a nice day in March, you can see 40, 50, 60 red-throated divers. These all in winter plumage, but you can see ones in summer plumage as well. So that's something that we've discovered fairly recently. Now, whether that's because they've only recently started going there, I guess it probably is, but normally only small numbers. And black-throated really only off Kennock Sands. Kennock Sands is by far the best place to see black-throated on the water. Again, you see them going past the point, but not so much on the sea. They're all handsome birds divers when you get close enough to them. Even in the winter, obviously in summer they're spectacular, but even in winter the plumage can be quite something if you get good views. Every winter now, and also even sometimes into summer, we get black guillemots, either on the east side of the Lizard Peninsula, or actually more commonly in Falmouth Bay, just off Falmouth itself. Places like Mainporth, Swanpool. But yeah, it's become something that you almost expect to see every year now, and I think that's probably relatively new. And indeed, there was one that lingered around just off the point, quite close in, for a couple of weeks. One year, I think it was in late summer, early autumn. So amongst the thousands and thousands of guillemots and razorbills and the occasional puffins, you can sometimes be lucky enough to see black guillemot. Winter gulls, glaucous gulls we seem to see rarely these days, but Iceland gulls relatively more abundant. Well, I say more abundant. With 1 or 2 a year is probably as much as we get, but and usually young birds like this one. This particular bird had a limp. You can see its left leg is not straight, and it was identifiable as the same bird in Coverack. This was in Coverack Harbour for one winter. Sort of a much smaller headed gull than a glaucous. In the textbook, they can appear to be quite difficult to identify, but in reality, the glaucous gull is a big beast, whereas actually the Iceland gull is a much more friendly looking sort of gull. And that was an older, almost adult one that was on the lizard itself, and usually feeding in the sheep fields one winter. And I was going down to the point one morning and just looked through the gateway of a field on the way down from my car, and there was this Iceland gull just looking through the gate at me. So again, it seemed churlish not to take its photograph. And then I think last winter we suddenly had a Cumlin's gull at the point for a few days, which is identified by these darker markings in the primaries. So this is, they think, a hybrid between Iceland gull and something else. It was initially thought to be a subspecies, but it's actually a hybrid of some sort. Can't remember what it's a hybrid with, but yeah. Cumlin's gull, much rarer than Iceland gull. Bittern is often in the reeds at Loo Pool, and often as not, you can't see the darn thing. Somebody sees it flying out or flying in, and the rest of us make do with going down there and not seeing it. But this particular winter, and again, I think it was 2 years ago, there was a bittern that just sat out in the open quite regularly, and it gave everybody an opportunity to see it well. So hopefully there'll be another one this winter that we can all see. So the one last year I never did see, and the only way really it was ever found was with a heat-seeking scope, which could pick it out in amongst the reeds. Other things that we sometimes get in winter, and I wouldn't go as far as to say that we often get geese, but there was one winter when we had a mixed flock of bean geese and white-fronted geese, which was something to behold. And they lived in the fields quite close to Lizard Village for several weeks, feeding on in the fields there. So the bean geese slightly bigger, and then this one, for example, is a white front with the black marks on the underside. And then this winter, well, late autumn really, we have a barnacle and a pinkfoot which appeared and spent a few days with us, sometimes together, sometimes separate. But settled on a part of Lizard Downs for a couple of days by these small pools. Nice birds to have. In fact, there have been a lot of barnacle geese this autumn, as you perhaps know, and a few pinkfeet as well. A good year for those two species. In winter, black redstarts here and there on the cliffs or in the towns. So in Lizard Village, for example. Yeah, and again, a nice bird to see. Usually the sort of female stroke immature type birds. Just occasionally you get a nicer looking male, but usually they're this type. Snow buntings, this one took up residence on one of the tees during lockdown, or during the pandemic when they weren't allowed to play golf, and they'd reseeded this particular green, which was right next to the coast path, and it was there for a couple of weeks feeding on this seed and then disappeared. Not common birds by any means on Lizard, or indeed anywhere in Cornwall, but just occasionally there's one or two that you can get good views of. One of the phenomena here is the chiffchaffs that winter around the sewage treatment works once the colder weather sets in. So that hasn't happened yet this year, but suddenly when we get a couple of good frosts, they all come out of the willow scrub and make their way to the sewage treatment works. And this is at Helston. And one of the things that you get in with the common chiffchaffs, of course, is the Siberian chiffchaff, which is this snowball of a bird that's completely white underneath. And it has these characteristically sort of slightly tea-coloured cheeks, which I always find is the best guarantee that you've got a Siberian chiffchaff. And they are tricky birds to be sure of. The call is different, very different and very obvious, but 9 times out of 10 they're not calling. So this photograph is of a Siberian chiffchaff on the left and an ordinary but rather pale chiffchaff on the right. So if you see, this bird has the tea-coloured ear coverts and a white, sort of buffy white supercilium. This bird, which is the common chiffchaff, doesn't have this colouring on the ear coverts and the slight yellowy colour in the supercilium, and a little bit here as well. So do be careful when you're identifying them. They are very similar, but once you've got your eye in, those ear coverts and the whiteness of the supercilium are pretty good features. And they don't seem to me to interbreed. And I wouldn't be, because you don't seem to see one that's half that and half this. I wouldn't be surprised if in future that doesn't end up being treated as a full species, but particularly because it's got different call. But time will tell. Yeah, now just some of the birds that you can see that I've seen anyway over the years at the boating lake in Helston. It's a great place to go, not least because you can get close to everything. And there's a cafe, which is always good from as far as I'm concerned. There's the cafe here, so you can go in there for a cup of tea if it's pouring with rain for a moment, which it was on this particular day. So good place to look for gulls. Here we've got med gull, adult med gull on the left, and a common gull, immature common gull on the right. 2 of the birds that this time of year you can stand a fairly good chance of getting good views at down on the pool there. Has attracted ring-billed gull in the past and 1 or 2 other rarities, Bonaparte's gull, for example. So always worth checking the gulls at Helston Pool. There was the famous escaped ferruginous duck, which came from goodness knows where and went to goodness knows where, but stayed with us for 2 or 3 years and was extremely tame, which was great because it meant you could get really good photographs of it. Nice bird, handsome bird. But I'm pretty sure it was an escape. Then one year, 2019, there was lesser scaup, which turned up, and I was lucky enough to find. So lesser scaup has this peaked head shape and slightly different marbling on the back to greater scaup. And in common with greater scaup, the black in the beak is only on the nail. So in a tufted duck, it comes over a bit further here. If it's a tufted duck without a tuft, then you could tell it by the beak, really. So yeah, that was a lesser scaup that turned up, and that stayed for a few weeks. That was very easy to photograph. And then occasionally we get greater scaup. So greater scaup, again, it's got black entirely restricted to the tip. Squarish head shape, rather bulkier than either lesser scaup or tufted duck. And different sort of articulations on the back. And if you can get it to flap its wings, there's a very good way of distinguishing lesser and greater scaup, because the greater scaup has got white going right through the wing, whereas on the lesser scaup, the white is restricted to this bit here. And this is much darker. So it can flap its wings, throw some bread at it or something to get it to move. It will show you its wing pattern if you've got any doubts. In fact, if you get this close to them, they're usually pretty obvious anyway. But yeah. And we don't seem to get a lot of ring-necked ducks, but the odd 1 or 2 turned up. And I always thought a far better name for ring-necked duck would be ring-billed duck, actually, because the ring on the neck is really not very conspicuous in any plumage, but the white ring on the bill really is. It's a standout feature that you can immediately see that you've got a ring-necked duck. That one was last winter, I think, if I remember correctly. This year we've had two Gargany. We had this adult male in spring, I think it was this year. It was very fine. And then we had a molting bird in the autumn, which just possibly could have been the same bird, of course, coming back. Because in the autumn they all look pretty much the same and nothing like this. So Gargany is quite a rare bird on lizard, but again we get a few every year. Somewhere or another they turn up. And at the moment, there's a very confiding common sandpiper that is just pottering around in front of the cafe. So if you're interested in getting some nice photographs of common sandpiper at the moment, that's the place to go. There's a wintering population of probably about half a dozen on the Halford River, Gillen Creek being a particularly good place to see them. But none of them are as confiding as this individual at the boating lake at Helston, which I think probably has been wintering there the last 2 winters. At least there's been occasional sightings from various people over that period. But in the last few weeks, it's just become incredibly tame and walks around at your feet. And another thing to do if you somewhere like Helston Boating Lake is to just check if any of the gulls have got rings. So this black-headed gull has got this particularly obvious ring on it, and it turned out to be from Poland, been ringed as a chick in Poland. So it's always worth checking the gulls. And in fact, you can see this herring gull here has also got a ring. That's probably a Cornish ringed bird, but yeah, check them out. So winter comes to an end eventually, and we start focusing our attention on spring migrants, and 2 particular sorts of habitat are worth checking over during the spring. One is these sandy coves. So this is Church Cove with the church there. Sorry, yeah, Church Cove at Cornwall, I should say. And also these isolated bits of scrub and trees, which are very good for migrants as well, for passerine migrants. So both habitats, and then also the coastal grasslands can be good for things like wheat ears as well, of course. So there are a few places, Gunwallow being one of them, that are well worth visiting once there are signs that spring migration has started sometime in mid-March normally. And one bird that I saw, that I went to this churchyard one morning about 2-3 years back, and it was hopping with black redstarts. There was 4 or 5 of them, all in that little church yard, including a couple of really handsome spring males, including this one. Much more showy than the ones that we normally see in winter. Handsome birds. And of course, the other handsome bird that sort of marks the arrival of spring here is the northern wheatear, which turns up again from mid-March, possibly even earlier if you're lucky. Although they never seem to be particularly numerous until we get towards the end of April and into May, when I guess maybe it's Greenland birds that are hanging around here waiting for the climate up north to make it worth going further. So the early birds seem to go right through very quickly, and then as the season progresses, there are bunches of them that hang around, and it's always nice to see wheatears. Again, I've got far too many pictures of wheatears because they're so handsome and often quite approachable. Flocks of whimbrel start coming through. You can see flocks of 15, 20 quite often, and they will come in and land on the fields right on the coast. So for example, at Old Lizard Head, which is just to the west of Lizard Village, it's quite a good place to see a flock that's come down. If the conditions are just right, you can catch up with quite a lot of them. And this is down at Cannock Sands. Cannock Sands, first thing in the morning before the dog walkers have got out there, is a good place to look for waders, sanderlings, sometimes in May, for example. And this year there was suddenly a knot down there, which is quite a good bird on the lizard. And then sometimes in amongst the wimble you get Bartow godwits as well. Again, this is down on Cannock Sands. Not a particularly common bird on lizard, but yeah, small numbers pass through, particularly in the spring, really, Bartow godwits. And then the passerines that come through in spring, we seem to never go through a spring now without getting 2 or 3 woodchat shrikes. There certainly were this year. Sometimes they're difficult to catch up with, and sometimes they're in the same few bushes for a couple of weeks. So woodchat has become one of those birds that we expect to see, and handsome birds in spring as well. It's a pet theory of mine that they're breeding somewhere in Cornwall, because how come is it that we get them every spring? And in the autumn we get juvenile birds in late August, and you're thinking, well, maybe. I mean, there are so many places on the lizard where they could disappear, or maybe up in the hinterland. Who knows? But I'm convinced that one of these days somebody's going to find a breeding pair of woodchucks. Hoopoe is something that we usually see, although we didn't see any at all this year. This particular one was quite amusing because we were down at Blackhead. There were 4 of us birding down there because there were a couple of pairs of serines that had appeared, and we were down there looking at those. And Paul Gay, who now lives on North Ronaldsay, and I were standing on a mound looking out over the area where the serines were. And we were talking about hoopoes and where we might go later on that day to see if we could find one. And as we were doing so, lo and behold, one flew in front of us and landed in this farmyard. So much mirth. Adult rosy starlings. Again, this spring it was a pretty poor spring really on lizard for birds, and this spring we didn't have any. But most Mays, it seems to be May, I associate them when the foxgloves come out. Most Mays we have 1 or 2 or 3 around lizard, and handsome birds, and wonderful to see them. They're obviously slowly spreading north and west, so chances are we will get years when there are, good numbers of them, I suspect, eventually. But always a great bird to see. Yeah, I said that it reminded me of foxgloves. It seems to be the case that just as the foxgloves come into flower is the right time for rosy starlings to come through. I think this particular year that I took these 2 photographs, there were 3 of them around the fields in the lizard area. Nearly all the photographs in this presentation, by the way, are mine. This one is one of Tony Blunden's, and he found this bird, this black-headed wagtail, so it's only fair that I include one of his photographs. Fabulous find down at Housel Bay, just below the pond there in the cattle field. Super bird, very photogenic. Yellow wagtail itself is reasonably common as a passage migrant in spring, but more so in the autumn, and sometimes blue-headed as well. Rarities. So the sharp-eyed view will be looking at the wing length on this bird and thinking, and the greyness, and thinking, well, is that a marsh warbler? Yes, it is. It was singing one evening when I wasn't around, and they taped it, and it sounded either marsh or Blythe's reed warbler. But one look at that wing formula tells you that immediately that it is in fact a marsh warbler. Luckily for me, it was still there the following morning, and showing not terribly well, but well enough to get a couple of photographs anyway, just to confirm that it was indeed a marsh warbler. This was May, about 3 or 4 years back. Another rare bird in the spring, which you don't really associate with spring at all, but normally sort of late autumn and even winter, is dusky warbler. So this was out towards Bass Rock, sorry, not Bass Rock, Bass Point, wrong talk, Bus Point, which is to the east of Lizard Village, and there's a lane, Lloyd's Lane, that runs down to Bus Point, and there are some bushes just before you get to the point itself, and this John Foster suddenly flushed up this bird off the track into some scrub, and it turned out to be a dusky warbler with these rather chunky orangey legs, yellowish orange legs, and a really white supercilium and completely white throat and dusky underparts. Red kites, obviously we all now see red kites in the sort of late spring and expect to see them in good numbers. There are occasionally records of black kites as well, but sadly it's one of the birds that's eluded me on the lizard so far. But one of these days, sometimes when there's a good northeasterly breeze blowing, you get dozens of these birds turning up on the lizard, and as often as not, they go all the way down to Land's End, turn round, and then end up on the lizard before they work their way back up into Devon and beyond. But always nice birds to see. And this was a Montagu's harrier that appeared on Goonhilly Downs a few years back. Again, Montagu's harrier is reasonably frequent in spring, which is surprising, really, given that the breeding population in Britain now seems to have virtually collapsed to nothing. But we still get them coming through. Wetlands, we don't have a lot of wetlands on lizard. It's one thing that we're a bit short of, but there are some. This is Croft Pascoe Pool, as you can see on Goonhilly Downs. It's one of the pools that is sometimes good. 9 times out of 10, I stop here on the way out to lizard and see absolutely nothing, but just occasionally there is something to look at. So one year there was a glossy ibis there for a couple of weeks intermittently, giving rather nice photographs opportunities because it was relatively tame. Still a rare bird on the lizard, and indeed not particularly common in Cornwall, even though in some other places it now seems to be, on the point of establishing itself as a breeding bird, and fairly regular, but still a rare bird on lizard anyway. Even more bizarrely, I was coming through Trebeau Cross roads one morning, and there was a black swan flying around. And when I got to Croft Pascoe, perched down in front of me and started swimming around. Not what I expected to see that morning. Obviously, one of the small population of feral birds that we have now in Britain. Great white egret, which not very long ago would have been a real rarity in this part of the world, is now again something we see 1 or 2 of every year. This photograph I actually took on the Scillies. I was cheating a bit, I know, but yeah, every year now we get 1 or 2 at places like the Loo Pool, although not always easy to see because they disappear off into the reed beds at Loo Pool, and on Croft Pascoe and 1 or 2 other places. Yeah, they turn up, and no doubt they will become commoner as time goes on, because they are definitely establishing themselves now in several places in Britain as breeding birds. One spring we had several records actually of black-winged stilt. I think it was 2 years ago, and this pool here was literally a puddle in a farmer's field out near Blackhead, and fortunately it was a farmer who knew his birds and was happy for us to go across his fields to have a look at this black-winged stilt. Again, I suspect it's something we'll be seeing more of as time goes on, because they seem to be spreading northwards and beginning to establish themselves in this neck of the woods. But fabulous birds to catch up with in spring. I think the same year, this night heron, John Foster found this night heron just down the road from where he lives, again out near Blackhead, and it was there for a couple of days, this young night heron, and then gone. But again, gave pretty good views. Just a bit about other wildlife. As the spring starts to come to an end, my attention tends to focus more on plants and invertebrates a bit, as the bird watching becomes a bit less exciting. So, and the lizard is a fantastic place for plants. So it's another talk entirely to talk about all of them, but I'll just show you a few. So this is a heath-spotted orchid, which can be really, really common. The amusing story behind this picture was I took this photograph and then a cow wandered over and ate the lot. So it was bizarre. He loved them, but well, she loved things. She obviously thought orchids were the bee's knees. So yeah, these were all eaten down to stubble. Just a few of the rarer things that you see there. So wild chives is a found in a number of places on the lizard. Not particularly rare there, but on a national scale, it's quite rare. Dropwort is all over the place on the heaths there in spring. And the burnet rose, usually white, sometimes pink. But yeah, the flowers just add a fine background to the backdrop to the bird watching in late spring and early summer. In terms of butterflies, the marsh fritillary, which seems to get rarer and rarer. It had a terrible year this year, I think, because of all the rain and the lack of warm sunshine. And I don't actually think I know anybody who saw marsh fritillary this year. Hopefully they've survived in one or two places, and hopefully next year will be much better for them. But I think hanging on by a thread is probably the best way to describe the marsh fritillary population on the lizard, unfortunately. Small pearl bordered fritillary is much more numerous, and if you're walking around on the coastal cliffs and heathlands in the right time of year in spring, then you can see quite a lot of small pearl bordered. And dark green fritillary is the other one that we get. In terms of moths, I'm not a moth expert at all, but I did bump into crimson speckled moth one autumn. So the lizard is a good place for migrant and rare migrant moths, I believe. So yeah, that's one. I'm familiar with it from Fuerteventura. It's a Mediterranean species. It's very common in some places, but it's not a common moth in Britain. And Death's Head Hawk moth, which I was really jammy to see because John Foster had found olive back pipit a few weeks back, or at least he hoped he had, couldn't find it. But in the night he'd caught Death's Head Hawk moth and it was perched on a tree nearby. So that was a bonus, even though we didn't see the pipit. Mammals, so roe deer is reasonably common. Just occasionally there's the odd red deer that turns up from further north. Otter sightings occasionally, sadly, normally as corpses, but they're about in low numbers. Hedgehogs, bless them, I probably mentioned because there are hedgehogs, but they're really difficult to find. Probably exist in very low numbers throughout lizard, but yeah, sadly they're much declined. And recently there seems to have been a lot of corpses of either polecat or polecat ferret on the lizard as well. I suspect polecat ferret, but we need to watch that situation in case we've actually now got polecats. One or two summer birds, just the things that we end up counting through the summer. Sedge warblers are quite common in certain places, certainly all around lizard village, there are quite a lot of sedge warblers. And then in the sort of more heathy areas, there is still reasonable numbers of grasshopper warblers, which you don't obviously normally see, but I was lucky enough to get a photograph of this out near Jollytown early one morning. So yeah, grasshopper warbler is doing reasonably well, I think, on lizard. And then as summer sort of edges towards the autumn, you start thinking about sea watching. And when the wind is reasonably strong from the southwest, we start looking out to sea rather than looking inland. And the bird which is the most abundant off the lizards, with the possible exception of rosebill and guillemot, is Manx shearwater. So it's not uncommon to spend 2 or 3 hours on the lizard point and see, I don't know, several thousand of these things. during the summer months. And I guess as the colonies on places like Lundy and the Scillies grow, we can only see more and more of these things off lizard. Until relatively recently, I suppose, great shearwater. This is a great shearwater here. You see the white collar on the neck, and there's black markings on the underwing, and some dark on the belly. Identify this easily enough as a great shearwater. These pictures, I should say, are taken from boats rather than from land, because from land they're usually all dots. But great shearwaters, yeah, I mean, there have been years in the past, I think, when you'd be lucky to see one, but these days, if we don't see thousands every year, we think we're being done badly by. They have become much more abundant as their food supply presumably has moved into our waters with warming seas. So great shearwater is now something that you can almost see any month of the year at this point. I have seen it in January. I've certainly seen them this year in October. So there really aren't that many months left when, if you look out to sea for in the right conditions, you haven't got any chance of seeing great shearwater. Still mainly July, August, September, and October. But yeah, way more of them than there used to be. And the same goes for Corris shearwater. So Corris shearwater with a yellow beak, and a bigger bird actually than great shearwater, and more bulky. You can tell them quite easily, a long way off by the way they're flying, even if you can't see any plumage detail. So yeah, Corris shearwater again, the numbers have exploded. There was one morning a couple of years back when I was out early I think it was probably early August, and I think in 10 minutes I had 1,000 or something ridiculous. I mean, you know, they can be incredibly numerous in the right conditions. Often quite a long way out, but not always. They can come quite close in the right conditions. Petrels, they're not easy to see off the lizard for the very simple reason that they're tiny little things, and you're staring at little blobs, but and that presents its identification issues. But they're out there, and again, this was taken from a boat just off lizard. But they're very obvious at this range because the white flash on the underside and the general body structure and everything just says that's a European storm petrel. Then this bird, which we see every year now in small numbers off the lizard, is the Wilson's petrel, which doesn't have the white flash on the underwing. And here you can see that the legs protruding beyond the tail. So, as I say, they do present identification challenges when you sea watching off headlands, but once you get in a boat and look at them close, they're relatively easy to identify. And they do have different flight characteristics. And again, you can see the feet projecting from the tail, and you can see the pale carpal patches, which are another good indication of Wilson's petrel. And then on one occasion, a few years back, and I didn't get details enough to submit it, but I did see a Madeiran, or as they now call them, band-rumped petrel, flying past. Remarkably different flight to any other petrel I've ever seen. Zigzagging, almost like a little shearwater, really. But yeah, they're out there, and I'm sure we're probably going to be seeing more of those as the seas warm. Skewers. So again, this is one of Tony's pictures. This is a Pomeranian skewer. An experienced eye, you can probably tell that immediately by the bulk of the thing. But skewers at sea are a dark art, I have to say. And identifying long-tailed Arctic and Pomeranian needs careful consideration, because although some of them are obvious, and this, I think, again, by the bulk, you'd say, well, that's Pom, straightforward. The plumage detail is not always easy enough to see when they're flying out to sea. So, yeah, skewers are an interesting challenge, and I consider myself to be somebody who's still learning about them after all these years, really. but all four go past, certainly with some regularity in the late summer and early autumn. And Pomeranians sometimes hang around in Falmouth Bay in the winter. Phalaropes, so 9 times out of 10, if you see a phalarope on the lizard, it's going to be grey. This one was actually on Helston Boating Lake one autumn actually. But in October in particular, if you get the right conditions, you can see them flitting past the point, looking a bit like sanderlings, to be fair. So you just have to be careful you're not looking at sanderling. But yeah, so grey phalarope is annual, I would say. Although having said that, I'm not entirely sure we've seen one this year. Maybe not. And then a couple of years back again, there was this redneck phalarope, which was in the bay next to the old lifeboat station in Lizard, which was picked up by a non-birder. It's amazing how many times the rare birds that turn up on the Lizard are actually found by either non-birders or visiting birders who aren't quite sure what they're looking at. And it makes me wonder what we're doing most of the time, because there we are out there all day, every day. And not irregularly, it's actually somebody who's not really quite sure that finds these things. But yeah, so this redneck phalarope in the bay there was a good find. Drew birders from right across Cornwall. The very obvious difference with these two is the beak. So the beak of a grey phalarope is, well, I won't go as far as to say chunky, but it's not needle sharp. And the beak of redneck, in whatever plumage you're looking at, it is like a needle. It's long and thin, and they're very easy to tell apart on that basis. Not so much so if it was flying past at a distance, I have to say, but when they perch in front of you like that, easy enough. And I put this picture of an adult Sabine's gull in because for whatever reason, this is one bird I still haven't seen on the lizard, and nearly every lizard bird has seen multiple examples of Sab's gull at this point. But for whatever reason, I always miss them. I can be sitting next to people who see them. I can be there 5 minutes after somebody's seen it. Yeah, it's but I'll get one eventually, and it'll be maybe next year. I'll finally nail down a Sabine's gull. And then the issue of the conundrums. So there are a number of species of seabird which you could, in theory, identify off the lizard, but we probably never will, for the very simple reason that you don't get near enough to get a good photograph that you can scrutinize. So short-tailed shearwater would be one. I mean, I know it's not on the British list yet, but they may occur in British waters. So there was one a couple of weeks back, a sooty shearwater, really quite close in. And you think, well, it could be a short-tailed shearwater. It's got the right underwing pattern, i.e. not very much pattern compared to an ordinary sooty, and it's dumpy looking. We were thinking, is it or isn't it a Balearic shearwater? But you're never going to identify it from land at that distance, I don't think. And there are a number of species which are like this. So South Polar skua, which we think has now been seen off lizard, not by me, but by other people. It's not an easy bird to clinch if you don't have photographs. And Scopoli shearwater is the obvious other one, which is very like Corries. And again, a number of us have seen what probably was Scopoli shearwater, but they're so difficult unless you've got photographic evidence to confirm the exact pattern on the underwing, for example. So, you know, room for us to find something really rare, but it's not easy unless you're in a boat and you can get nearer to these things. And then we move to autumn. So as with the spring, autumn tends to start with a few wheatears. So again, a good example of some wheatear photographs. Most often in autumn, they look a bit like this because they're young birds. But they are lovely, handsome things. We don't seem to be able to find rare wheatears though. So far, we've struggled with those, certainly in recent years anyway. But one day there'll be a desert wheatear or an Isabelline, I'm sure. Just keep looking. Windchapped is the other thing which you can guarantee to see in reasonable numbers in the autumn. Again, usually immature birds like this one. Pied flycatchers, it's always a good sign that migration is ongoing. If you get a pied flycatcher, you can have days when there are half a dozen or so. Always good birds to see, particularly when they're on the cliff top. So this bird on the cliff between Soapy Cove and Kynance, you know that it's only recently arrived because it wouldn't be there by choice. They'd always be in woodland. So when you see things like this on the cliff, you start thinking, okay, this is a good day to find a rare bird. But then sometimes when you're walking the cliffs and you find a bird, it's not what you expect it to be. So this barnacle goose was sitting on the rocks on the cliff top when I went round again between Soapy Cove and Kynance one early morning. Yeah, not what I expected to see, but there you are. Nice bird to find anyway. Wryneck is one of the stock birds of the autumn. So this again is one of Tony's photographs. They can turn up in numbers, I suppose you'd say. There can be half a dozen on any particular day in the autumn. There can be half a dozen that you can't see as well, because they're not the easiest birds to actually see. But yeah, lovely birds if you can do. And I think the lizard, the west coast of lizard, with all its rough grassland and close crop grassland, is a regular stopping place for certain wrynecks, certain individual wrynecks, because there are odd places that if you go to them on a certain date, you can almost guarantee that you will find a wryneck, even if it's only a brief view. So there's one near the petrol station at Mile End. There's a place there which doesn't look particularly good for wrynecks, but I find if I go to those, there's 2 or 3 fields there with a bit of hedge, and at the right time of year, there's almost always a wryneck, and I just can't help thinking it's the same bird coming back through. But it'll be there for maybe a week, maybe 10 days, and then gone, and you won't see another one there until the same time the next year. So yeah, wrynecks, it's a good place to see them, but you've got to find one, if you see what I mean. They're there all through autumn, really, from late August, certainly through to the early October. I suspect there's always a wryneck there somewhere. Most years, again, one of Tony's photos, most years we get melodious warbler, but this year I think there was one, but only a one-person bird. Most years there are 2 or 3, and one or other of them is one that you can see relatively easily. But last year, or this year rather, we didn't have an easy bird, but wonderful birds, and identifiable from icterine by the short wing extension and lack of pale panel. But yeah, fairly regular. And one of my favourite places for looking for rare autumn migrants is the Kynance Cove itself. It's got a cafe, which is, as you've already learned by now, is something that I rather like to have nearby. And there's this little clump of bushes, and it's actually quite a rare plant. It's from South Island, New Zealand, and it's called daisy plant. And it's been planted in a number of places around Lizard. And there's 2 trees here which have spread out over many years and become quite a chunk. And I found 1 or 2 good birds in those few bushes just by sitting there and staring into them. So wood warbler was in there one autumn, which is sadly becoming an increasingly rare bird in Cornwall. And icterine warbler, which I found in there again 2 or 3 years back. I think you can see the long primary extension there and the pale panel, which identifies it as being an icterine rather than a melodious. Another good place in autumn is Church Cove. So that's the bottom end of Church Cove, and particularly the churchyard and the woodland around the churchyard are pretty good for autumn migrants. Having said that, most times you go around and see absolutely nothing, but every now and again you just hit lucky. It's a very good place to see yellow-browed warblers in October. Although this year there were 1 or 2 in there, but most of them were elsewhere, I must admit. But always a good bird to find. one year in November, there was a fantastic male red-breasted flycatcher in there for several weeks. In fact, it didn't disappear until about now, sort of into December. Looked as if it was going to winter, but I guess probably died eventually. Fantastic bird. And again, I've seen several red-breasted flycatchers in Church Cove over the years. It's a good place for them. And the one really rare bird that I found in there back in 2019 is red-eyed vireo. And I don't have a photograph of it at all. For some reason in 2019 I wasn't really doing photographs. This is Tony's photograph of the red-eyed vireo that I found in there. Passerine, American passerines are pretty rare on lizards. We always hope that we're going to find an American warbler, but many years go between one and the next on the lizard. But hopefully maybe next year. That's what we always say. In Lizard Village itself, in the autumn, you get the rather dowdier version of rose-coloured starlings. So this is a juvenile, and there's almost always at least one in Lizard Village in October, September, October time, and there's one still there now, I think, slowly molting into adult plumage. But you know that it's not the same bird. You think, well, maybe it's the same bird coming back, but it can't be because they're always juveniles. So they, for whatever reason, Lizard Village is just a great place for young rose-coloured starlings. Other autumn birds, redback shrikes. Again, we didn't see one this year, but most years you get at least one redback shrike, sometimes juvenile woodchat as well. Ring ouzels, towards the end of October, there's a regular influx of small numbers of ring ouzels around the rocky parts of the coast. White storks, as you know the birds that are being introduced up in Sussex at the Net Project sometimes wander down this way, trying to find their way across the channel, as they did this year. I think there was 70 odd seen this year. So white storks suddenly appear over Lizard at some point in August some years. And this year, not a great photograph, but I was lucky enough to have a crane fly over me when I was at Mullion, and it headed off over Mounts Bay. It was seen from Selonian, then it was seen flying through the Scilliars going west, and that was the end of it. Nobody ever saw it again. Obviously, it was programmed to fly in the wrong direction and got lost out to sea, presumably. Sad, but you know, that happens to some birds. Cattle egrets. So now they're winter visitors with us fairly regularly on the lizard, and in the cattle areas in East Lizard, Northeast Lizard, there are flocks of cattle egrets in the winter. But if you're lucky in the autumn, one sort of dips down in front of you into the cattle fields for a few minutes and then heads on. So you get passage birds coming through on the lizard. It's just there for a very short period and gone. Certainly this one is typical in that regard. And then there's the conundrum of Prydanig Airfield, which is somewhere that you can't access because of its military use. And that there quite often are rare waders, for example, on there, things like dotterel. Generally speaking, we can't access it. But this particular time, this white rump sandpiper was on there for a while, and it was organised for us to go and have a look at it one morning. So yeah, good bird, but not associated with water at all in this particular instance. It was just wandering around in grassland. Also seen in fields on the edge of Lizard briefly, but mostly on the airfield. Yeah, another yellow-browed warbler, always wonderful things to see, but then just every now and again, if you're very lucky, late autumn, you get Pallas's warbler as well, with this lovely pale rump and the stripe down the eye, these lovely rich yellow cypsilium, fabulous birds. Again, this is one of Tony's photographs. Again, not one this year, but there were 2 or 3, I think, the year before. Always a great thing to find. And then a couple of years back, one of the guys heard something going to roost near Cadgwith, and he said he thought it might be dusky warbler, but wasn't sure. So I thought, well, I don't know, we'll go and have a look anyway. Probably won't see anything. And so there I was at dawn in mid-October. And something was lurking around in there. After about half an hour, I could see something that was getting active, and lo and behold, it was a Rudd's warbler. So you can see here from the face pattern, and the chunky orangey legs, and it sort of hopped its way up the inside of a hedge along the field. Three other birders managed to come and see it, and then it hopped into another hedge, and that was it. It was never seen again. But yeah, Rudd's warbler, great find. And then this year, I was just wandering around down at the car park in Cadgwith, and I saw a brown bird fly up into the scrub, and thought, "Ah, that didn't look like a robin." Wasn't quite sure what it was. Hung around, tried to see it, nothing whatsoever going on. It was raining a bit at the time, and wandered on, came back, and the sun had come out, and what was clearly a Locustella genus warbler was sitting in the sun preening and absolutely completely ignored me. So I was able to get photographs, videos, goodness knows what. It was just doing the whole thing. Sadly for me, it was just a standard grasshopper warbler, but it could just have been a Pallas's grasshopper or a lanceolated, but just an ordinary grasshopper warbler. But what a wonderful bird! I mean, most years you get a glimpse maybe of a grasshopper warbler, or maybe just not see one at all, just hear it. But here was this bird sitting out in the full sunshine, and yeah, I really enjoyed that moment, must admit. Bunting. So reed bunting is they do breed around the reed beds and marshes on the lizard, but I don't tend to see them very much. Normally, really, I only see them when I'm out birding in sort of late autumn. And this female reed bunting perched up and made a nice photograph a few weeks back. And then its lookalike, the little bunting, is with these lovely chestnut ear coverts and the lovely white eye ring. Quite a different bird, but you could kind of make this into little bunting if you weren't careful. The little bunting is not annual on lizard, but does occur from time to time, sometimes more than one. Down in stubble, usually. Lovely little birds, which we may see more of them, because there was that flock that was wintering in Cornwall last winter. So hopefully it'll be something that we see a bit more of in coming years. Late autumn, we always get some Lapland buntings, and this particular one was out on Goonhilly Downs and very confiding. 9 times out of 10, Lapland bunting is just a bird flying over and giving its call, but this bird was easily photographable. And then before you know what's happened, you're seeing the odd snow bunting perhaps, and you've realised that the year has gone all full circle and you're back with your winter birds again. Woodcock, again, late autumn. This photograph wasn't taken on the lizard, but I thought I'd throw it in anyway. It's such a nice bird, one of my favourite birds, woodcock. But sadly, of course, a lot of them are still shot. The lizard area is one of the places that's well known for its woodcock shooting, which I personally think is a bit of a shame, particularly given that woodcocks are coming fewer and fewer. And this particular one was a road casualty by Goonhilly Earth Station one morning. But yeah, I think we should leave them alone personally. Luck. So I just talked to you a bit about luck in finding birds. So one winter's day, a couple of years back, I thought, right, I'm going to go out to the grasslands at Gunwallow, and I'm going to bash around and I'm going to find myself a Richard's pipit. And within 10 minutes, I had indeed found a Richard's pipit. Although that photograph wasn't actually at that site, but that's what happened, which was, it's nice when it comes together like that. And then just a few tricky things. So this bird was in fields out at Lizard a few years back now with meadowpipits, and I just wasn't sure whether it was a red-throated or not. It got this strange head pattern, which I guess is something to do with disease or infestation or something, but it was quite stripy, and I just wasn't sure. So in the end, anyway, I sent photographs to dear old Killian Milani, and he sent me a long list of reasons why it was a medipipit, which I'm sure it was. Things like there's no white mark on the inside of the tertials and things like that that I wouldn't have known about. So every now and again we find a bird that confuses us a bit, and we can learn from them. And then on the subject of pipits, a few years back, late autumn, there was this fine buff-breasted pipit from America which turned up on the fields at Old Lizard, and for a few days and then disappeared again. Completely unmarked mantle is a good starter for this one, and slightly different colour tones to the standard rock pipit, which we have obviously a lot of. Much duller bird, but of course not very long ago they were all thought to be one species, and now they're separated out. So finally, I'm just going to go through the really rare birds that have turned up on Lizard over the years. So this, not a great picture, but it was a hell of a bird to see. Some of you might have gone down there to see this. This was the brown shrike that Brian Cave found down in Soapy Cove, probably about 5 or 6 years back now, and led bird as a merry dance, and very, very difficult to see, but got this black, more obvious black mask than red-blacked in the same plumage. Pallid Harrier, this is one that Steve and I submitted. We weren't 100% sure because of this odd black mark under here, but it passed through the Rarities Committee well enough as a pallid. That was out on Goonhilly Downs for a few days. This time of year, and it's happening in about a week's time, we all get together and have a Christmas party for lizard birders. And one of the things we do is to award the Booby Prize for the best bird found during the year. So I'm going to run through the birds that have won it. So no surprise, the first award for the Booby Prize was for the brown booby, which I found at Kynance Cove, and those are the drawings that I made as part of my submission to British Birds. And that's some James Thirlaway's picture of it. This is very, very scruffy. It was heavily abraded, which I suppose is consistent with it having travelled rather a long way. Obviously a juvenile, very worn, and it attracted enormous numbers of birds from right across Britain to see it. Caused havoc in the National Trust car park at Kynance, apparently. I was telling them that it was me that found it one morning and got a bit sticky, but there we are. And then there was Dougie's Rufus Bushchat, which was a worthy winner of the award out at Blackhead. Fantastic find. And for those of you who are lucky enough to catch up with it, very confiding too. Wonderful, wonderful bird. Turned up in a completely unexpected place, just beside the track up there. John's red-breasted flycatcher in Church Cove won it one year because it's such a fantastic bird and so confiding. And then Siberian Stonechat, Edward O'Connor, who works at Natural England's place at Bachin, found this just outside the Natural England HQ there. And this year, I suspect he'll win again because he found this fantastic red-flanked bluetail that some of you may have gone to see out on Kynance Farm. Wonderful, wonderful bird, and something that we'd been thinking for years should be found on the lizard, but up until this year hadn't been. This year also there's a new trophy for the lizard birders, the best list of the year. So we'd be interested to see who wins that. It can either be, the full annual list, or it could be a day list, or whatever it is you want to do, really. But anyway, we'll have a bit of fun with that. Just sort of marks the year in some way, and helps to keep the birders together as a unit. One or two conundrums to look out for the future. So redwing, as I understand it thus far, Icelandic redwing, the Icelandic subspecies, has not been recorded in Cornwall for definite. This isn't one. This is a Scandinavian redwing, but there was a good paper in British Birds a few months back, which gave you a lot of photographs and guidance as to how to identify an Icelandic redwing. So maybe somebody this winter will pick out and photograph an Icelandic redwing. Who knows? They must occur. I mean, a lot of redwings do now, I think, winter in Reykjavik. You can see them in midwinter in the gardens in Reykjavik. But the majority, I'm sure, must still migrate out down to Ireland, and must be some in Cornwall. So that's a bird for us to find sometime over the coming years. And then the conundrum, that's a standard common stone chat with this rusty patch, quite a big rusty patch running down the breast. And then there's these birds, which have much more restricted orange on them, which is characteristic, really, or typical, should I say, of the continental subspecies of it, which again isn't even on the British list. And I'm convinced that that we probably do have a small number of them breeding in Cornwall, but they're not confirmed. So they have this reduced area of orange, and they have a really bold white rump. So genetically, they're obviously different to the norm, but it's not confirmed that they are or are not European subspecies. So maybe someday somebody will actually confirm that, presumably by catching it and doing DNA. I don't think there'd be any other way of confirming it. And then there's the birds that we still haven't seen, or at least it may well be on the lizard list. I'm not sure, but we haven't pinned down a little bit yet. So there are all sorts of things that that we can still see that haven't certainly been seen in recent years. And there was a little bitten on the lizard this spring, but it was in a garden where we couldn't access it near Coverack. There's always a few birds that get away. So yeah, there we are. Hopefully there's some pointers to what will happen next year. But yeah, that's the lizard birding, and I hope you enjoyed it. Very happy to take any questions.
Brilliant. Thank you, David. That's really great, really interesting. That's brilliant. Thank you. Has anyone got any questions for David? Oh, you're looking like you're going to get off scot-free, David.
Marvelous.
Hang on.
Oh, we've got a hand up. Just unmute yourself and feel free to talk when you're ready, guys.
Yeah, thanks very much for the talk, David. I've grown up on the lizard in the birding there in the early 80s, there were very few people watching the lizard. And I just wonder if you feel, I know there's a lot of people watching it now, are there still areas that are really underwatched? I've picked up, in the early 80s, I used to watch Downers Valley. And as far as I know, nobody really watches Downers Valley very much, although it's had some fantastic birds there and thereabouts. So where are the places that people aren't going if somebody was looking for a secret spot to develop for themselves?
Well, I think you're certainly right about Downers Valley. I mean, I've been in there a couple of times, but there's so much cover in there, and it's well placed, and there must be rare birds going in and out of there every year. It's not the easiest place to cover, and not necessarily the easiest place to get at either. But that would be a good place. But in terms of the answer to the question, where is underwatched, the whole of it, all of it is. Normally there's probably only maximum of 6 of us out at the best of times, you know. And as you know, you can walk down a path, and then a bird 10 minutes behind you can spot something that you didn't notice. I mean, I suppose a good example of that would be the red flank bluetail out on Kynance Farm. And Kynance Farm is an excellent place for finding rare birds, Kynance Farm and Jollytown. And on a busy morning, there might be 3 people through in the whole day bird watching. So I mean, I walked past the bush where the red flank bluetail was the day before, as I think did Dougie. Now, it may or may not have been in there, but something like a red flank bluetail could have been in there a week before anybody saw it, to be honest. They can be so difficult to find. So I think the answer is, my answer is everywhere. Even the classic places like Church Cove, and the youth hostel area down at the lifeboat, sorry, at the point there, Housel Bay, Cathilian Cove, all of those places are completely underwatched, but less so than, yeah, places like Downers Valley. I mean, even Blackhead gets very few people going to it. And given the number of rarities that have occurred there in just the last 2 or 3 years, there must be stuff going through there without being noticed. So yeah, everywhere.
Thank you.
Thanks, David. Any other questions for David? Keith, you want to jump in there?
Yes, please. So take you back about 45 minutes to the peregrines and the breeding successes. I remember reading a paper fairly recent, I think it was, by Southwest Peregrines, who seem to think that the ones further up the Cornish Peninsula, I guess, weren't doing well because of lack of prey, was the hypothesis, although I think it was subsequently sort of debunked. I mean, lots of prey for our resident peregrines in the lizard, and to go with their reasonable successes by the sound of it.
Well, it's a good question. I mean, we don't monitor them. I don't monitor them, but you see young peregrines on a fairly regular basis in late autumn, maybe 2 together. Is not rare. So they clearly are raising young, and I see as many now as I did 25 years ago. I'm pretty sure I haven't noticed any decline in the number of times I see them. So just on that anecdotal basis, I would say they're doing reasonably well. I mean, if somebody was studying them and knew how many eggs they were laying every year at each site, and you know, monitoring the number of birds that fledge from each nest, they might come to a different conclusion. But I certainly don't see any evidence in terms of the number that I see around that there's any difference. Personally, and what they eat is another question. They certainly seem to quite like taking pot shots at chuffs, so which is less than welcome, and hopefully they don't normally succeed, but they do certainly take the odd chuff. There's feral pigeons on the cliffs, so they're not big numbers, so they must be eating a few of those. I mean, there are no big wetland areas where they would go to get waders, for example, but there are a lot of birds that are passing through, of course, that we wouldn't notice. Things like snipe and various other things that are probably too high most of the time for us to actually even know that they're going over. And I suspect maybe they take quite a lot of birds that are just passing by. But I must admit, I don't think I've ever seen peregrines actually kill anything on the lizards. You don't see it happening unless you're looking out for it. But yeah, they seem to be surviving reasonably well to me.
Okay, no, thank you. That's good to hear. If it's status quo, that's good. They seem to think they're doing worse in North Cornwall and places like that. Still on the raptor front, then I like those oak woods around the Helford, which clearly are pretty undisturbed and good, and similarly around Low Pool. Any thoughts of the lizard birders putting up an osprey platform for them? Do we see ospreys?
There already is at least one that I'm aware of.
Okay.
Not far
Excellent.
from here. In fact, we got the guy to put some new branches up there recently because it was getting a bit threadbare. So, but yeah, we're hopeful. But they certainly come through much more in the autumn here. I don't normally see ospreys in the spring. I mean, I know there are odd ones that do pass through in the spring, but I guess they go through pretty quickly. They don't seem to linger on the Helford. It's only in the autumn that we seem to see them. So I'm not that optimistic that they're going to colonize of their own accord anytime soon on that basis, really. Might be wrong, but I just have this feeling that it's somewhere that they know is good for a few weeks fishing in the autumn, but they're not looking at it as a place to breed, I don't think.
Yeah, I think as the pool experiment expands, hopefully, then there will be more and more who
Yeah,
are sort of philopatric, drawn to the area where they were bred roughly. And yeah, the more platforms that are plastered with new foliage and
yeah.
whitewash or white paint is always a good one for attracting them. Certainly was in Scotland. Good. Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Brilliant, thank you. Is there anyone else got any questions? And just a couple of things from me. Firstly, the link for the support for the Mare Lake Hide I've put in the chat, along with the advertisement for the next talk, which is on the 18th of December by Dr. Mark Eaton of the Rare Breeding Birds panel. So he's going to give us an update from the work they've been doing, not just from Cornwall and the southwest, but also stuff they're finding all over the UK. So I'm pretty sure that'll be quite interesting. Excellent. I don't think there's any more questions. So thank you very much, David. It's been fascinating and really enjoyable. Actually makes me want to go and brush the binoculars off and get out there and see what I can find on my local patch.
Yeah. Great.
Brilliant.
Thanks
all. Thanks everyone for coming, and hopefully see you next time.
Cheers.
Bye.
Thank you.